Even if you've never tried it, never seen it up close, or known someone addicted to it, we've all heard a lot about heroin lately. Less than a month after Governor Peter Shumlin devoted his entire State of the State address to Vermont's heroin crisis, one of Hollywood's most admired actors died of an apparent overdose. Philip Seymour Hoffman's death seems to have been a tipping point. Cities across Massachusetts are now taking action. Taunton held a community meeting last night after that city saw 64 overdoses, 5 of them fatal, in the past month alone. And next week, residents from across the Commonwealth are invited to a forum at Greenfield Community College to discuss the state's heroin epidemic. In this week's In-Depth Focus Report, we're taking an in-depth look at who's using heroin and how they got hooked. WGBH News reporter Gail Huff has been exploring the scope of the problem. What did you learn, Gail?
Emily, there's a new type of heroin that's on the streets now. Users tell us the new heroin is the most potent ever.
These right here are like most current forms of sale, heroin sale. These bags, all of them, probably go for $10 each.
Most of them are snorting it, and I think they don't realize the relevance of how dangerous that is.
Michael Miles is a Lowell cop who sees the new heroin on the streets. As a recovering drug addict, he knows users want the strongest, and they're getting it, and accidentally overdosing.
It's a lot stronger than it's ever been. Put your lungs and your brain to sleep. Sometimes you don't wake up.
The heroin is laced with fentanyl, a strong painkiller similar to oxycodone. The fentanyl-heroin combo makes it 10 to 100 times more potent and popular.
Heroin's a lot easier to get. It's a lot more accessible to anybody. Nowadays, high school kids are getting it. College kids are getting it.
In the past several months, more than 100 people in the United States have died of heroin overdoses, prompting law enforcement to declare a public health epidemic.
Eastern Massachusetts has the highest overdose rate. We have a big heroin problem here.
Abby Dean is clinical director of Right Turn, a drug rehab center in Arlington, where today's heroin addict looks much different than the addict of the 70s.
The typical person we see is a 20-year-old white kid from the suburb. You know, it's our kids and our parents and our friends.
Woody Geisman founded Right Turn. A rock and roller from the 80s band Del Fuegos, his counselors specialize in treating artists, particularly musicians. He's a former user and says many addicts get their start in the bathroom medicine cabinet, with drugs prescribed for pain, injuries, or surgeries. Percocet and oxycodone are most popular.
We've seen younger and younger people have access to opiates. Through the internet, we can have access to about any medication, and it's unfortunate that they end up on the streets.
It's easy to get fentanyl online without a prescription. Athletes abuse pills to self-treat pain, but they're also used to self-treat depression and anxiety. The pills are costly, about $150 a day for a habit, so many end up turning to heroin. It's cheaper and can be snorted or smoked, making it a lot more attractive for those who don't like needles. How long does it take to get addicted?
2 weeks. It is hugely different than it used to be.
1 out of every 4 people who try heroin will become addicted.
If you start at 14 and 15, which people do, when you're 19, you've been a heroin addict for a while.
Does your brain send a signal that you are overdosing and you know what I mean?
No. You're calming down, you're getting happier, you're feeling that warm, fuzzy feeling. In an overdose, you're gliding into like joy and bliss or absence of feeling, which is the goal.
Overdose occurs when the brain becomes anesthetized, literally forgetting to signal it's time to breathe. Do you ever miss the high of heroin? John Cohan is a recovering drug addict who now works as a counselor at Right Turn. He says people are surprised by today's young heroin addict from the affluent suburbs.
The public had an image of a heroin addict as an urban, homeless person living on the street, you know, kind of stealing, robbing people and shooting up in an alley, and that's changed. People need to see the face of addiction in the face of recovery and know that we are the people that live next door to you. We're the people who work with you.
The new fentanyl-laced heroin scares him. It's cheaper, easier to get, and far more potent.
An early heroin user might be sniffing 1 to 2 bags of heroin a day. 5-6 months later, that person might be injecting 10 bags of heroin a day.
Most common heroin on the street right now comes in glycine bags.
Miles sees it firsthand, and he knows it's in every community.
Can't whistle past the graveyard anymore. It could be your kid, my kid, your grandkid.
It's too many kids who think they're getting high and end up dead.
So how many people in Massachusetts have overdosed? Well, that's part of the problem. They haven't been keeping any statistics. In fact, state police say now, Emily, after this latest spike in heroin overdoses, they are going to start keeping actual statistics of not only the fatal overdoses, but the non-fatal ones, too.
Actually, some cities and towns do just that, but I think they need a Massachusetts database. It's interesting. I was looking at the names. Then they try to be clever with the names, like Obamacare and McDonald's, Blue Ice.
And it comes in, the way it's packaged also is really geared towards young kids. It's in, attractive little glass packages with sometimes little cartoon pictures and very clever names. Yeah. You may recall a couple of weeks ago during the Super Bowl, they busted some dealers in New York, and they had them all stamped NFL. Oh. It's just, it's sad, but that's a part of the industry.
All right, well, my next guest has made a career studying and counseling drug addicts. Dr. John Kelly is the founder and director of the Recovery Research Institute at Mass General. He also serves as a consultant to the White House and the National Institutes of Health. Welcome, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you.
So is this uptick, can you call it an epidemic, or is it cyclical like everything else in terms of drug abuse, or is this just a runaway problem at this point?
Well, this is a new epidemic that has occurred in part fueled by the increased availability and accessibility to pharmaceutical opiates, which has then led people down a path into cheaper street-based heroin. People don't intend to become addicted, and this is what we saw on the report, is that people start off in a very casual way trying pharmaceutical opiates with the sense that these are prescribed drugs and therefore they're safe. So they have the perception of safety, not realizing how these drugs can quickly generate an addiction problem for which they're not prepared to deal with.
Just to elaborate on the actual effects of an overdose. So when you take too much, it's shutting down the brain neurons. What's happening? Because it's signaling you not to breathe. What is actually happening?
Well, it essentially, it affects the very deeper, oldest part of the brain, the reptilian part of the brain, which is to do with breathing and swallowing, for example. So, in other words, you're so sedated that even that very primitive part of the brain, which controls breathing, is actually stopped.
Fentanyl itself, what is it used for, apart from mixing it, cutting it with heroin? As a doctor, what would you prescribe it for?
Well,
or it's actually over the counter, I guess.
I'm actually a psychologist. I don't prescribe medications, but fentanyl is a medication that's used to kill pain. And so it's a very potent form of analgesic painkiller, like heroin is. And when mixed, it can produce an even more potent form of painkiller.
All right, I'm going to bring Thomas Golden into the conversation. He's a state representative from Lowell who's calling for an increased control of prescription drugs. And thanks for joining us, Tom.
Thank you.
I heard you say that your sister is a pharmacologist or in the pharmacy business.
And this
is how you got onto this.
Correct.
What would your legislation do in terms of the pharmaceuticals?
Over the past 8 years, there's been a lot of my colleagues who have been working towards this, and what we're really trying to do is raise awareness and trying to make this happen. First and foremost is prescription monitoring program, which we have put it back into place. The Department of Public Health is doing a heck of a job at trying to reintroduce this and making Massachusetts the leader in prescription monitoring. And some people get a little concerned with this, but actually it's really about ensuring that the prescriptions are going where they're supposed to be going, that people aren't doctor shopping and things of that nature. But up on Beacon Hill right now, this has been coming. We have seen this. Like I said, over the past 8 years, I would venture to guess this is a tsunami that is hitting the Northeast, hitting the entire country. And for one of the reasons that the doctor had mentioned, one of them is that people are comfortable with pharmaceuticals.
Yep.
They believe that a pharmaceutical is something that cannot hurt them. When taken appropriately, of course, it's the best thing to take.
How would legislation help the biggest problem? I'm embarrassed to say some of the stuff I have in my medicine cabinet. How would it, people like me, how would it prevent or stop people like me from holding on to stuff that I shouldn't have in my, and having somebody else come in and take it out and use it? I mean, it's one thing if you know where, but I have my stuff legally, but somebody else could come into my medicine cabinet and grab it.
But continue to raise awareness. You know, years ago, that you didn't even have that thought. People hung on to prescriptions for the next time they hurt their lower back or the next time that trick knee gives out. And today what we're trying to do is continue to bring education back into the realm of pharmaceuticals, to let people know that there are people. I think that the report had said earlier that your drug addict today isn't the drug addict of the 70s. When I was growing up, let's say in the 70s and the 80s, it was always their problem, someone else's problem. And people would point to those people saying that they created their own issue. Well, in this sense, and maybe the doc would have something to say more about this, some of these pills that are out there today are far more powerful than what people are giving them credit for, and very, very addictive.
They're addictive unto themselves.
Right.
Oxycodone.
Right. The cycle to dependence for opiates overall, compared to other drugs, is much more rapid, and they're very seductive too. So they have a therapeutic purpose, of course, which they're prescribed for and for which they're very effective. But if people misuse them, use too much of them, then they can produce other kinds of effects which people like, and then they want to repeat. And especially in certain individuals who are more vulnerable. Some people are more genetically vulnerable to the rewarding effects of certain drugs like opiates, and they're more prone to take them.
One thing I was surprised to discover was how cheap heroin here. We've been doing reporting on this for the past couple of weeks, and as you might remember, in his State of the State address, Vermont Governor Peter Shumlin addressed this and said, hey, the people in Vermont are willing to pay a little bit more. Here's what he had to say about that.
Due to our proximity to Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and other cities where heroin is cheap, dealers can make a lot of money from addicts in Vermont. A $6 bag of heroin in New York City can go for up to $30 here. So think about that for a second. A $6 purchase can sell for 5 times that much just a few hours up the interstate.
This is really a disturbing problem in Vermont. It's socioeconomic as well. There's a lot of unemployment. It's coming back in certain areas, but a lot of rural, isolated areas in Vermont. Shumlin says it's absolutely devastated his state. I mean, is it young people? Address that. Is it socioeconomic? Is people start taking drugs because they're depressed?
Well, for some people, yes. For other people, no. They're quite happy. They're out in the world, maybe experimenting as young people do with different types of substances. What they don't bank on and count on is the fact that these drugs are very seductive to the brain, and they will produce the kind of euphoria which some people say is beyond words for some people. And greater exposure with a drug like that leads more people into problems with addiction, and that's what we've seen. Because these pharmaceutical drugs, which have a perception of safety, have been the gateway, those become too expensive, so they go for cheaper products which can produce the same effect, which is heroin.
We received a number of emails last week when we were talking about doing this as an in-depth piece, and one woman who contacted us said she's an MIT graduate. Just like you said, she got hooked on Percocet, and then her addiction became too costly. And then she writes, to be honest, heroin is the only drug that gives me any relief from a depression that pretty much keeps me from functioning. So she's saying she takes it to overcome depression.
You know, and I think it may help with depression. It's certainly not recommended or prescribed for depression. In fact, the heroin actually may be exacerbating the depression in a vicious cycle, so that the drug actually becomes the cause of the depression.
All right.
I would have to completely agree. I mean, obviously, knowing, Doctor, everything that you do, but all the phone calls that we receive in the office, and we can almost go from block 1, block 2, block 3, right down, and I can pretty much guarantee you the phone calls that come in, at least to my office and my colleagues, when parents or loved ones are calling and they're saying, my loved one is addicted to, name your drug of choice in the medicine cabinet, if they don't get a hold of it sooner rather than later, it will get a hold of you. I mean, the heroin piece, I've sat down with many people who are addicted to heroin, and quite frankly, not one of them ever thought they would get to where they are.
Exactly. I'm sure
it's a very sad story, but it's a very serious story.
All right, Representative Tom Golden and Dr. John Kelly, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.